Eeryk and Simon.
How are we all going, people? How are we all going? As you can see, I'm by myself. Simon left me alone. Um, if you're on X, you probably would have seen the thumbnail if you saw the teaser for this. If you're over on YouTube, you would have seen the thumbnail. If you're over on X, you may have seen the teaser for this as well. And a nice little Friends reference there with Joey and Chandler. Chandler being the Simon in this situation, disappearing on me. But that is completely fine. It just means you are stuck with me. Do let me know how all of the audio is sounding, whether that is up to scratch. I'm actually in charge of everything for once, so I need to make sure I'm on top of it all. But I'm more than happy to do it. We missed last week, but this week I was like, nah, stuff it. I'm going to do it on my own. And Simon was more than happy to see me take that responsibility. Now, quickly having a look, Phil has entered the chat and he's asked me how I am doing. Doing very well, Phil. Thank you very much for asking. How are you? If you don't know Phil, Phil was an unfortunate recipient of police brutality once upon a time. And ever since, I've considered him a legend. So thank you for joining as usual, Phil. Anyways, I've got quite a few articles stacked up for us today. I've got a discussion or something that Richard Prebble, who just resigned from the Waitangi Tribunal, has had to say yesterday, and Newsroom of all people, of all places, has decided to publish it. So hey, I'm all for that. We've also got an article, a couple articles over from Bassett, Brash and Hyde. The first from Peter Williams, a second one from Rodney Hyde himself, discussing Christopher Luxon. We're also going to have a little bit of a discussion into political polling, notably how Hipkins is preferred Prime Minister in the latest poll, and just kind of the outlook and why it is polling is going the way it's going, because it's not flash right now if you support the coalition. We're also going over a little bit into American politics, heading to the Daily Wire and charliekirk.com for a couple topics, notably trans-related issues, notably one such Democrat congressman woman having a bit of a hissy fit about being, well, let's say, not appropriately addressed, and as well as whether or not everyone is following Trump's executive orders. And we're going to finish out the night discussing the whole DEI issue that New Zealand First is banging on about at the moment. So yeah, we're going to finish off the night with that. DJ over on TikTok says, welcome, thanks for the post on TikTok. You are very welcome, DJ. Thank you very much for tuning in and watching videos throughout the week. Phil also says, I saw that, but there's more an indictment of Luxon's pathetic job than Chippy's popularity. Exactly. Luxon is a massive problem for the coalition right now, and whether or not they address it, well, that remains to be seen. Now, I'm going to quickly switch over here right now, and I wanted to start with this because I quickly saw it before we started, and I thought this is just a beautiful representation of how Trump does his job, right? He wants something. He wants a foreign leader to do something. He suggests something unorthodox and hyperbolic. The left then claims he's a fascist, stupid, and that his plan won't work. And then all of a sudden, said leader that he wants them to do something caves and they do it. Or at least he gets some form of concession. That's pretty much what he's doing with these tariffs, to varying degrees of success. But nonetheless, you can kind of understand why and how he's going about achieving his goals as a leader. And I kind of have to respect it, if I'm completely honest. But where we're actually starting today is right here. Just give me one moment. I'll bring the chat back up on my left. There we are. So yes, this first article comes out of Newsroom by Mr. Richard Prebble himself, who recently resigned from the Waitangi Tribunal. And it says, misunderstandings and the treaty. very quickly, I'll get to Shortland Chambers. Welcome, Shortland Chambers, once again to the Eeryk and Simon show, but it's just me on my lonesome. Shortland says, Chippy is a clown. Labour have not changed, nor do they offer an alternative. Labour like Luxon over Chippy Green's party any day. I tend to agree. We will get into that a little bit later on. So what has Richard Prebble had to say? Well, he starts by saying, Dayman Salmond says that anyone who does not speak Te Reo, who opines on the Treaty of Waitangi, should be regarded as a lunatic or a fool. Oh, I feel a little bit insulted if I do say so myself. No. But what's he say? Professor Sir Hugh Carfadoo, the guy that I use the translation of on a near daily basis at this point, has a translated Te Reo version of the treaty back into English, and Article 3 states, for this agreed arrangement, therefore, concerning the government of the Queen of England will protect all the ordinary people of New Zealand and will give them the same rights and duties of citizenship as the people of England. You do not need to speak Te Reo to know that the same rights and duties as citizens is not a promise of equality of outcomes. If Salmond is correct, then only Chinese speakers can make a contract with the Chinese. I have negotiated contracts in China. When out of Parliament, I negotiated a $350 million contract. None of our engineers spoke Chinese. None of the provincial officials spoke English. Like at Waitangi in 1840, there are English terms for which there are no Chinese equivalents. I wanted to be sure the terms were understood. My translator conveyed the Chinese official discussions of the terms to me. They understood. I realized that because written Chinese characters are not exact, the Chinese officials were relying on the English text to express the agreement. We know that similar discussions of words for which there is no equivalent in Māori occurred at Waitangi. Salmond disparages Henry Williams, who translated the treaty, but we have his letter to Bishop Selwyn written on April 3, 1847, which states, I can, however, confidently state that at several meetings held at Waitangi on the 5th, 6th, and 7th of February, I gave the fullest explanation of the treaty, and that no one chief signed the same through misapprehension, for I took the utmost pains to make them understand perfectly the character of the proposed engagement. Now, I love this. In fact, I, believe it or not, haven't heard or read this quote before, and I'm extremely grateful that I've now seen it, thanks to Richard Prebble and this article. I was, of course, aware of the meetings, notably the meetings of chiefs on February 5th, 1840, where there were quite clear examples of Māori who would become signatories, showing that they understood what the document meant. Showing that, yes, there was a clear understanding that cession of sovereignty was in play here, but they needed reassurances and so forth. So it was very, very much a case of, hey, look, we had an English text, we had a Māori translation of said text, they lined up with each other in accordance with, the various meetings around the time of the signing, which made it clear that there was no debate as to whether or not these had different meanings. So, yeah, I thought that was very, very insightful. Now, she goes on to saying, far from being naive or ignorant, the rangatira at Waitangi engaged in a sophisticated debate about sovereignty, power, and authority, drawing on their own ancestral precedents and political philosophies. Arguments about the meaning of words in Scripture have caused churches to split and the message of Gospels to be lost. Arguments about the meaning of words is causing the message of the treaty to be lost. And Salmond is not a lawyer, but I am. If the tribunal was right and the chiefs and the governor misunderstood each other, so there are two completely different treaties, then there was no agreement at Waitangi. There is a legal principle of misunderstanding. If two parties completely misunderstand each other, then there is no meeting of the minds, which is essential for a valid contract. And again, if we go back to those discussions and even the quote up here, it's very, very clearly we had a meeting of the minds, that we had an understanding, and that such an understanding was agreed to. I mean, it's impossible to dispute this, and yet we live in a society where that seems to be the norm. Academia disputes objective fact. Te Pāti Māori disputes it. The prevailing narrative disputes it. Your university lecturer disputes it. In fact, I need to post it because I forgot to, but I was strolling through Instagram, as I do on occasion, yesterday, and I saw a story from one Eeryk Kapakingi, the leader of Toitu Te Tiriti, the son of Te Pāti Māori, not co-leader, but MP, Maria Meno Kapakingi. And he was saying, I'm about to give a lecture to 1 million university students. And so the fact, and not just university students, second year law students. Isn't that lovely? That's just what you want for your law students, to be indoctrinated by an extremely radical racial separatist who has a distorted view of a document. Which actually brings me back to what we've just read previously. Arguments about the meaning of words is causing the message of the treaty to be lost. This is 100% true. This is what the Waitangi Tribunal is making very, very clear. They have no regard for the meaning of the words of the treaty any longer. No, it's all about, we look at this document, we will take whatever we want from it, and then we'll make up the rest of its meaning. This is what they've done with the principles. The principles are now the meaning rather than the words themselves. This is not how we should be operating. But I think it's a very important point, and this is exactly why principles should not be the way that we understand the treaty's meaning, unless said principles accurately reflect the treaty's meaning. So, I mean, there's, of course, two ways we can go about this, and this is something that I've repeated time and again. Either we can support Acts Treaty Principles Bill, which accurately represents the meaning of all 3 articles of the treaty, or we can remove all reference to the treaty principles from law, have no regard for them whatsoever, and start requiring that any reference to the treaty and laws is done so with an accurate representation of what the words of the treaty say, not stupid principles the Waitangi Tribunal has twisted for decades. Now, a quick look at the chat. Phil says, Trump walked into power with a bunch of treaties agreements that have the US providing concessions. Yep. The other parties in the agreement, Trump knows those concessions are his cards, not theirs. Exactly. This is how Trump operates. Smart businessman. Back to the topic at hand, DJ says, so the Māori who say they didn't cede sovereignty are putting down the Māori of 1840. That is generally what's happening. When you see the average Te Pāti Māori supporter, Toitu Te Tiriti supporter, the general person in the media purporting this narrative, the academic, the lecturer, they like to say that Māori were misled, that Māori simply did not have the capacity to understand this, or that Māori, through no fault of their own at the very least, did not understand what they were agreeing to. And so they like to say that, oh yeah, they agreed to the Māori text, but when you really dive deep into what the Māori text says, that doesn't stand up to scrutiny either, and so they have to backtrack, they have to make up another few lies, and it becomes a mess. It gets to the point where they are, at the end of the day, saying that Māori rangatira of 1840 were stupid. Because when you are repeating a lie over and over and over again, you can't substantiate your position, the facts don't support it, you are forced to continue making stuff up. And eventually you just turn yourself into a hypocrite, or just looking like a dickhead. Phil says, of course they knew what they were signing. The prevailing narrative and acts for 130 plus years support it. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, for a good chunk of New Zealand's history, our law, our understanding of these things been pretty set in stone. I mean, one of the modern narratives is that, you know, Māori were kept in the dark about what the treaty actually said, and and that there were two treaties, that the Māori treaty said something different, and that Māori were kept in the dark for this, of this fact for like 100 years or something. And it's not until the 50s, 60s, and 70s that, people started having their eyes opened. That, it wasn't until like 1975 where we started really understanding that, and recognizing this Māori text. And so, yeah, they've just taken one period of time, notably the Treaty of Waitangi Act 1975, and used that as a foundation for a lie that has driven their entire narrative in the 50 years since. It's ludicrous, but that's how the left operate. That's how radicals operate, because if you don't have anything that you can rely on that's factual, you have to make it up, and then hope enough people repeat that same lie until it just becomes the accepted truth. As you've said before, the wording in English and Māori confirm each other. Synonyms have been used. Exactly. You can say very similar or identical things using very different sentences, different sentence structure, different words, but the meaning is ultimately the same. They were discussed at length and agreed to 100%. It's all revisionism by the tribunal. The tribunal is... I've in the past given the tribunal some slack. I'm like, okay, yeah, there's merit to the tribunal. And I suppose technically there is still some merit to the tribunal, but in order for it to have some merit remaining, you would have to start from scratch. You would have to basically gut it of everyone there. You would then have to make very, very specific appointments. In fact, I would argue that you should make elected appointments to the tribunal. And then from there, they have a specific role to fill. They can't expand outside of that role, and it's very carefully watched. That is, in my opinion, if you're going to retain the tribunal, that's what's going to have to happen. But as of right now, I'm more than happy for the tribunal to go kapoof and disappear tomorrow, because they have contributed nothing but division to this country. The things that they are upholding right now are absolutely divisive. Their entire view that we as a country have of this document, or are supposed to have of this document, is rooted in their revisionism, in their blatant lies, their blatant disregard for truth. Ain't nobody got time for that. Ain't nobody got time for that. Now, I'll quickly finish off here. And it states, I have been accused by government and opposition leaders of not doing my due diligence before joining the tribunal. The trigger for my resignation was the tribunal's draft strategic plan. It was 3 months after my appointment when I was given a copy and given a few days to comment. The tribunal was forecasting an increased workload. Reinterpreting Article 3 to be a promise of equality of outcome is a promise no government can ever meet. That is insanity. Because as I've said this many a time before, equity is impossible. In fact, the only way to get any form of equity of outcome, which is effectively what equality of outcome is equity. The only way to achieve that in a very short time period is through inherent inequality. And then as that inherent inequality is still there, your period of equity is going to be short-lived, and you'll get to a point where suddenly things are inequitable again with respect to outcomes. So you would have to continue doing a cycle a bit like this. Okay, so you're discriminating against this group, this group, this group, this group, and this group to try and narrow the, get things closer together. If there is a point where they connect and they have equal outcomes, then someone's going to suddenly start being better off again, so you might have to change who is being discriminated against. That's nonsensical. Simply can't happen. But as we know, these guys are radical Marxists. These guys are radical gender and identity politics people, and they don't actually believe this stuff. It's simply a means to implement policy that they agree with. They don't actually care about equity. It's all just a means to an end. So if we ever did find ourselves in a position where we've had systemic inequality for the so-called greater good, they're not going to flip who's getting the benefit or who's being discriminated against just because suddenly things have come together again. No. They're just going to continue with the status quo. This is all about power and control at the end of the day. and has absolutely nothing to do with the greater good of humanity, society, and whatnot. Phil says its time is done, and now they are a tool of separatist ideologues. Exactly. They have shown that they're incapable of fulfilling their role appropriately, and I've got no time for them. I don't think any New Zealander should have any time for them, and any criticism of getting rid of them is quite frankly going to be going into one ear, out the other. I don't care. Pill also says, or in fact, they are the foundation that grew the current separatist ideology with their revisionism. I think it's a bit of both. They've certainly contributed to what we have right now, with the Party Māori being openly separatist, arguably the most racist political party we have ever had in our parliament. The most divisive. They're a genuine disgrace to our country. But hey, that's not the narrative, and so me saying it is, it's all conspiracy or it's all nonsense because the media doesn't say that, so it can't be true. No. The media does not dictate truth. The media have proven that they don't dictate truth because they would rather spend 20 minutes every night talking about school lunches. Honestly, if One News does another story on school lunches this week, I'm going to break something. Probably best to switch off, but can you blame me? I am sick and tired of school lunches. Honestly, at this point, just get rid of them. Do you agree? It's a bit of a pivot, but school lunches, just get rid of them. Clearly, the government isn't, whatever the government has done, which is far superior to what they were doing because it's costing us less money and there is still a lot of children getting food as a direct result of it, who are ungrateful, by the way. Oh, I'm sick of getting the same thing once a week. Oh, it's a bit bland. Or it's, I'm sorry, once upon a time, people actually had to make their own lunch, take it to school, and often it was the same thing every bloody day. And it certainly wasn't lasagna one day, butter chicken the next, this, that, and the other thing. It's ridiculous. Phil says school lunches are unneeded. You know what? I think that the reasoning for initially implementing school lunches was, hey, look, we've got a number of students, albeit small, who simply need food at school, and their families, for whatever reason, are not getting them to school with lunch. So we need some form of program where schools can identify those students and provide them something at lunchtime if needed. But that's transformed into, if a school has a student in need, suddenly that school is getting lunches for pretty much their entire school. Or certainly, within that criteria for the allocations for schools that are eligible. But, then all of a sudden that entire school's getting it, irrespective of whether or not that child is actually able to bring their own lunch to school. Parents are actually being encouraged not to give their kids lunch. And then all of a sudden it's the government's fault when, there's too many lunches that need to be made, and so we're having supply issues, we're having the general consequences that you get when you mass produce something, which is a reduction in quality. I'm sorry, but if we're going to retain the school lunches, what we need to do is dramatically reduce the number that we're providing. And frankly, I think it should be a matter of the actual families have approval from the Ministry of Social Development or some other agency saying, okay, your students, they are, or your children, they are entitled or to be provided with these meals. That is that. However, this is literally what our benefits are for. This is what our Ministry of Social Development is for, our welfare safety net is for. It's so that if you have children and you're struggling to put food on the table, they will come and help you. There are means out there. You should not need school lunches to do that. So as far as I'm concerned, we don't actually need them anyway, because the people who are in need should be getting that support in the first place. And if they're not using that support properly, then frankly, someone needs to come in and investigate that family and establish why that's not happening and take action to ensure those kids are getting food. But it should not be some broad, school-wide, lunch program. Certainly not funded by the taxpayer. Sure, make it a community initiative if you want, but it shouldn't be a nationwide thing at many, many different schools feeding a ridiculous number of children. Kiwi Mark says, welcome. Stop the lunch or have a cold lunch. Yeah. See, I'm all for, frankly, I'm all for the whole idea that, if a school is given some, milk once or twice a week, and a couple boxes of Weet-Bix. Boom. If a child needs some food because they don't have any food, then, some teachers or whatever can use some discretion and say, okay, hey, look, it's lunchtime. I'm going to go take you in. Here's a couple Weet-Bix, maybe a little bit more, depending. That's that. Frankly, I would call that a better lunch than a Marmite sandwich. But there is nothing wrong with a Marmite sandwich and an apple, Chris Hipkins, contrary to what you might believe. But these are the times we live in where if you do anything that's remotely unkind, then suddenly you're the devil. And as far as I'm concerned, what the government has done is they've looked to expand this program at a reduction of the cost. It hasn't quite gone to plan, but the fact that this program exists in the first place is a privilege for these students, not a right. The Anglo-Saxon has joined. Welcome, the Anglo-Saxon. I very much enjoyed a video I watched of yours last week. I can't recall what it was, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. You say, good evening, sovereign subjects and any treaty subjects listening in. Yes, we've just covered the one treaty subject for the evening. Kiwius, welcome. The school lunches at my kids' school ain't even that bad. Exactly. What you get on the menus right now is they get the worst of the worst examples. And it's just a media beat up. They just rehash the same stuff. They don't actually care about the kids at all. It's all about clicks and, giving the government shit because they can. Alrighty, should we move on to the next article? I think we should. This next one... Oh, we don't want that. Sorry, folks. Wrong slide. The next one comes from Brash and Hyde, Peter Williams. A media coup. Now, if you aren't aware, there's been some rumblings about a Canadian billionaire who was called a right-wing billionaire by Katie Bradford, because obviously that's concerning, because any right-wing billionaire that wants to invest some money or buy a stake in New Zealand media is a big concern for New Zealand media, given how anti-right-wing they are, given how radically left they are, how little integrity they have. But anyways, Peter Williams, the media coup, entitles it "The Empire's Striking Back." I love that. That's a great title. Though, to be fair, all it may do is probably just, I don't know, make things a little bit less partisan. Like that's what you want from media. He starts off saying, "It is one of the most significant moves in the history of New Zealand media. In time, it may be seen as one of the most important manoeuvres in our recent social history. Expat Canadian businessman Jim Grennan has bought just under 10% of New Zealand media and entertainment, NZME. So they have like News Talk ZB and the Herald and so forth. We know a little of Grennan's mindset through his previous ownership of small online media outlet The Centrist. He has views which might be regarded as conservative and contrary to the prevailing media narrative in this country. It appears he wants more opportunity for all sides of a particular story to be told through outlets like the New Zealand Herald and News Talk ZB." Now that's very, very important, because if you go to the New Zealand Herald, News Talk ZB is probably the biggest point of difference of the mainstream outlets, from my perspective, but I suppose maybe that's because more of their stuff is just them talking rather than actual articles, comparatively. That is. Like you've got your stuff, you've got the spin-off, you've got Newsroom, you've got this, that, and the other thing, RNZ, or as Simon likes to say, the People's Republic of Radio New Zealand. And then you've got the New Zealand Herald and News Talk ZB, which are, I feel like they're slightly better, but there are far too many people working there who are still just lunatics. I'm just going to call them lunatics. I think anyone who willfully lies for a living is a lunatic. I think, and then believes it, of course. So yeah. If he can be successful in his boardroom coup, then he and other like-minded company owners are almost certain to bring their view of the world to company management and staff and make changes to editorial direction. It is common practice in the world of the media business. The likes of Rupert Murdoch is a past and present master of the art. At the New York Times, the Sulzberger family has been at the helm since 1896, offering support to causes as varied as Fidel Castro, the Nazis, and ideologically driven 1619 Project. In more recent times, Jeff Bezos at the Washington Post and Paul Marshall, in charge of the Spectator and GB News, have stamped their personal authority on the direction of those outlets. Now, I think something that's important to note is that there's, a media outlet's not always going to be perfect. There may still be some degree of bias there, but if you want more editorial centrism or bipartisanship, then not. Right now, we've just got an abundance of the media says what they can and they get away with it. Right? They don't care whether or not it's partisan, whether or not it's factual, whether or not it's accurate, whether or not it's turning readers off. They just say what they want to say to spin whatever narrative they want to spin, because there aren't really any consequences right now. Because as far as they're concerned, going bankrupt has got absolutely nothing to do with what they're saying. It's got everything to do with just the state of, it's the fault of misinformation artists online. But outside of that, it's just the state of media right now. It's just a hard economy. But it's got absolutely nothing to do with them, and so they're not going to hold themselves accountable. So as far as they're concerned, they can get away with whatever. But this would be a point of difference. This would start showing that, hey, look, maybe there is a way that you could go about telling these stories that are a little bit more reasonable, a little bit fairer. I'd certainly hope so. If this coup is successful, I think it's a net benefit, even if it's not perfect. Coming down here, unsurprisingly, much reporting around Grennan's move has been negative. The reaction of one-time Labour Party cabinet minister and now union organiser Michael Wood was as predictable as the sun rising in the east. We see a pattern that has been incredibly unhealthy in other countries, Wood said of billionaires moving into media ownership roles to be able to promote their own particular view of the world. A few questions for Mr. Wood would be, why is the pattern incredibly unhealthy? Is it because Mr. Grennan's particular view of the world is not the view of Mr. Wood or of the journalists he represents? This is ultimately it. The way that media works right now is there is a narrative. There is a prevailing narrative. If you do not find yourself agreeing with that narrative and you speak your mind on that, you are sharing incredibly unhealthy views. You are sharing, divisive views. Views that are bad, negative. They are inherently racist, or they're just unhelpful. Anything under the sun to try and disparage the individual or to discredit said views, that's what's used. Doesn't matter if they're valid, not at all. Validity of opinion is irrelevant. It's about whether or not what you say is consistent with the prevailing narrative. Michael Wood has a particular view of what the prevailing narrative is, and it's not centrist to centre-right, common sense type views of the world. Like the type of views of the world where school lunches, any suggestion that they're removed is, that's inherently evil. That's horrific. Whereas, anyone thinking logically would realize that probably we should get rid of them. But it's not the narrative. Coming down, Mr. Wood and his clients have been able to rule the roost for too long, reporting on the numerous contentious issues of the last 5 years. This has been dreadfully imbalanced. Take the matter of the Treaty of Waitangi and race relations in general. Every media outlet in this country took money from the improbably named Public Interest Journalism Fund started by Jacinda Ardern's Labour government in 2021. NZME had received nearly $7 million up till the middle of 2023. One of the conditions attached to receipt of any money from that $55 million fund was that it must be used to actively promote the principles of partnership participation and active protection under Te Tiriti o Waitangi, acknowledging Māori as a Te Tiriti partner. This is the important part. And this is why such things are hypocritical for the left to criticize, for starters. Oh, how dare this billionaire want to, come in and involve themselves in our media to bring back some degree of editorial integrity. because I prefer the status quo where our journalists and our media organizations are more than happy to accept a bribe to essentially push whatever the hell we want them to. Great. Yeah. Okay. And that's exactly what they did. They paid the media. They used COVID as an excuse to say, oh yeah, they need to get bailed out, so we're going to have public interest journalism fund. We're going to ensure that we uphold, that we prop up these media organizations, and in exchange, they have to behave in a particular way. So when it comes to the matters of the treaty, any story related to the treaty has to be done through the lens of participation, partnership, and active protection. So in other words, in order for them to objectively cover, let's say, the Treaty Principles Bill, well, they can't. In order to objectively cover something like the Three Waters discussion, well, they can't. Anything related to Māori issues, they cannot objectively cover, and they could not objectively cover all the way through till late June 2023. Well, they kind of just decided to stick with it after that point because they're ideologically inclined to do so. It's a disgrace. They were effectively propagandists. Not effectively, they were. Still are. But at least now the money is not quite there. Not with that contract at the very least. Going back to the chat very quickly. Samuel says, L to media literacy. I think L to media everything with respect to the mainstream media. And at the very least, the Anglo-Saxon says it's the whole shareholders group, apparently. They're over the woke. And see, that's the thing, right? Is you do sometimes forget who is behind these companies. Not all of them are like-minded, but at the end of the day, it's who holds the biggest stake. Which group of people have the biggest say? I mean, I'm quite a big fan of Suits. If you're not a fan of Suits, there's always power struggles in Suits. And with respect to the law firm, you got one side that believes in one future for the firm, another side that believes in another future for the firm, and ultimately it's whoever has the most support at the end of the day that gets what they want. So if this is enough to balance that power so that the more rational-minded people are able to have some control over the editorial process, then lovely. That's exactly what we need right now in New Zealand. Mr. Yappy says, are you going bald? I will eventually. My hairline's not too bad. But my hair is not particularly healthy. So, particularly on the front fringe. Everything else is good. But yeah, it forces me to do certain hairstyles which are less flattering. For a 25-year-old male with a bald father and a bald grandfather, I'm doing pretty all right. My 24-year-old brother is a little bit worse off. Not too much, but a little bit worse off. So I'm at least winning in that respect, even if he is much skinnier and a touch taller. But I'm still the handsome one. Marginally. I think he probably dresses better. A little wondering, welcome. You say, well, that's like any social program, isn't it? Well, yeah, social programs always have something wrong with it. And if you decide to make changes to it, it comes under a lot of criticism by people who fundamentally believe that social programs are not just a safety net, but an entitlement. That's the problem. We need to move away from this idea that, social safety nets are entitlements. They are a luxury that we have because we live in a country like this. Personally, I would prefer that we move gradually to a society where such social safety nets are very much a last resort, and that we've actually got established family supports that enable us to actually rely on them, so that at the very least, if we do have a social safety net, we don't have to provide as much of that support. So, for example, I'm in a position where, because of family support, over the last few years, particularly with illness, I've had to be far less reliant on government support than someone else who has none of that support from family. So, moving to a society where we have just more community support rather than a nationwide social safety net would be ideal. But I appreciate that there is a need to some degree for a social safety net. And given we're in a country that has the luxury of that, sure. But it's not something that we should be entitled to. It's a luxury, and that's why it's great to live in a country like this. The Anglo-Saxon says, declining Hobson's pledge ads flicked a switch at the Herald. Perhaps, yeah. I think if you're someone like the Herald, and you need all the money you can get. So if something as tame as Hobson's pledge is wanted to advertise, take the money. I mean, it's not like you're advertising some adult magazine. Like, for goodness sake, get over yourself. You need money. It's a business. Take the money. So yeah. PLJ, welcome this evening. Evening all. I have friends who binned their New Zealand Herald subs after the Hobson's Pledge ads fiasco. 100%. I personally just could not bring myself to ever subscribe to mainstream media trash. So yeah, your friends are a little bit behind the times. But a good decision. A good decision. Phil says, you catch Brennan interviewing Rubio, where she asserted Nazi Germany used free speech to persecute. I haven't. I'd need a little bit more insight into that. Sounds fascinating, for sure. Phil says, embrace the bald. Look at how much time Simon wastes on his quiff. I do feel that Simon... Let's see. Would Simon look good bald, everybody? I mean, I know he looked pretty good as the Dalai Lama. He looked pretty good as the Dalai Lama, I must say. Who else has he been recently? He was bald as Ice Cube a couple weeks ago. Looked pretty good. I probably don't look too bald. Actually, I've been bald before, but I probably don't look too bad bald. Though I'd prefer a darker complexion for that, which is why I look so good as what's his face alongside Ice Cube last a couple of weeks ago as well. A Little Wondering says, exactly, most countries don't have sport. Exactly. We are extremely, extremely privileged. I think more learning needs to go into helping people organize their money to cover a couple months. I certainly think that people need to be taking more personal responsibility for their finances. I know, sometimes I cut myself short, but short within in a sense of, look, I mean, I can afford to do this, but it means I will not be living in a luxurious way anytime soon. I will be counting every penny for the next few weeks until I can build that back up. But what I'm investing the money that I am spending in is very, very important. So, for example, as of last week, I had $200 aside for set things. Now, I had to commit that money for the purpose of things such as the green screen that I've got going right now, among other things. And so now I'm much shorter. However, I've ensured that I've got enough backup so that if a sudden need arises, I'll be okay. It's just called common sense. Not enough people have it though, unfortunately. Socialite asks, where is Simon? Well, firstly, welcome Socialite. Simon is unfortunately, life keeps you busy. There are things that are unfortunately more important than talking nonsense on the internet. Or in this case, truthful nonsense, or nonsense that's at least more objective and more eye-opening than what you get on your 6 p.m. news. You catch my drift. Anyways, no, Simon's he's been busy, and I'll leave him to it. I'm not going to pry. He's got more pressing matters. As hey, this is a privilege to do. It's really enjoyable. We love doing it, but we're not always going to be available. But I am, so I'm here by myself. And yeah, if you know where Simon is, I was very, very tempted to make a thumbnail with like a Where's Wally puzzle looking thing, and then try and get his face on one of them, but that was just going to be too difficult. But yeah, Simon will be back in short order, I suspect, sometime either next week or in the near future. Of course, he's trying his best to do his own little shows on Sundays and whatever other days when he's available as well. But hey, yeah, life can keep you busy. So that's that for Simon. So you're stuck with me, unfortunately. Phil also says, this will blow your mind. They are trying to use revisionism to make censorship good and democratic. Alrighty, folks, see what Phil put in the chat there, the link to Fox News. Perhaps go take a look at it. I'll certainly do my best to remember to do so myself. Socialite says, bald or not bald, who cares? The passage of time will make you whatever you will be. No point in worrying about it or speculating about it. Just don't be a Prince Harry and mock your balding brother only to go bald yourself. That's valid. That's valid. My brother's hairline's more than okay. It's just slightly worse than mine. So it's more of a lucky me for now, but I know I'm screwed. If you're wondering why, $1 at Pack and Save, so I got 12. um, Given it's got 6 grams of carbs per 500 mils, I'll take it. Better than drinking fizzy. So let's go. Continuing quickly with the chat, we'll finish this off before moving on to the next article. What I will do actually is that's enough for this article. Switch back to my face, my pretty face. Lovely. Quickly have a go. Dr. Bill says, "Say it ain't so, Eeryk. Say it ain't so. It ain't so. Guess we'll never know. Guess we will never know." Now, moving on, because I let that go for a little while. We're all the way through to discussion of polling, which I love. I love discussing polling. If you don't know me, then you may not know this, but I love polling. Spend too much. I spent several hours just yesterday and the day before, going through polling and comparing or trying to establish a kind of bias that certain pollsters have, like whether certain pollsters, polling in the same time period, have, they typically overpoll one party or other party, and I kind of got somewhere with it, but I didn't really. Whilst I found it interesting, I didn't want to like integrate it into any statistics that I released. But it was fascinating. Like Roy Morgan, for example, they have got this weird thing with overpolling the Green Party. So I presume they've probably just got far more young people in their demographics than they probably should, or particularly far more people from Auckland who are younger, for example. It's a bit weird with like with the US polling, they reference crosstabs a lot. I'm sure the crosstabs are a bit messy, and in order to try and get the most representative sample, one group gets overrepresented or whatever. Roy Morgan, generally speaking, these days is one of the least reliable for polling, in my opinion. My two go-tos are Talbot Mills and the Taxpayers Union commissioned Curia poll. Just statistically speaking, they've been the best over the last 2 years, in my opinion. I find that News Hub research, now they're no longer News Hub, of course, they tend to understate the minor parties quite a bit. One News Variant, a little bit of the same, particularly New Zealand First, but they're not quite as bad. But yeah, the two go-tos for me are Talbot Mills. Shocker. Not the leaked internals that Labour like to drop every now and then, but they're proper releases. They are very reliable. In fact, I think the average polling miss from their Talbot Mills' final poll ahead of the last election and the election result was like half a point, if that. Maybe I think it might have even been 0.38 or something. Ludicrously close. I mean, of course, some parties were worse than the others and it averaged out, but they did a very good job. Something can be said for Curia, though notably I would note they do typically overrepresent act a smidge, but of course this is an every week thing, an every poll thing. Sometimes they just get it wrong, sometimes not so much. Then again, when you're trying to compare that to other pollsters who may in fact themselves be wrong, I don't know. It's hard to know, but I will get on to this article because I am tending to waffle, and I pressed the wrong button again. Here we are. So from the Otago Daily Times, Hipkins preferred Prime Minister in latest poll. Labour leader Chris Hipkins has overtaken Christopher Luxon as preferred Prime Minister, and the centre-left bloc would be able to form a government based on results in the latest Taxpayers Union Curia poll. The poll conducted between March 2nd and 4th showed National up 1.7 points to 33.6, and Labour up 2.8 to 34.1%. The Greens dropped 3.2 points to 10, and ACT declined 2.3 points to 7.7. New Zealand First was down 1.3 points to 5.1, while Te Pāti Māori were up 2.1 points to 6.5. On these numbers, the centre-right bloc would not be able to form a government, and for the first time since the election, Hipkins was ahead of Luxon as preferred Prime Minister in this poll. Luxon dropped slightly to 20.3%, whilst Hipkins rose to 3.1 points to 20.7%. David Seymour fell to 5%, Winston Peters rose slightly to 8.6%, and Chloe Swarbrick fell 4.1 points to 4.8%. Curia is a long-standing polling company, but is no longer a member of the Research Association NZ body. And you know what? Despite no longer being a member of the Research Association NZ body, they are still far more credible than probably half of our pollsters in New Zealand. Far more reliable for this kind of monthly polling that they do at the very least. Though I would say there has been quite a bit of movement in this one. Right? I do think this is a classic case of we're in the middle of the term, things are jumping around. The people that you're getting for a representative sample are just slightly different to a point where you are seeing the Greens drop 3, but Te Pāti Māori going up 2, and Te Pāti Māori on 6.5 is ludicrous. Let's be real. There's no way in hell they're actually at 6.5, and if they are, then we're all bloody doomed. But it's fascinating, isn't it? Though I do like to note that the media, so Stuff notably, they only tend to report on Curia polls when it's favourable to the left, or they can spin some sort of anti-government or anti-right-wing sentiment to it. Like, oh yeah, the government's still ahead by like 8 seats, but they dropped by this much, or whatever. That's the only time they tend to actually report on them, which is a real shame, because I think it's just pathetic, to be completely honest with you. But hey, that's the world we live in. The media have no regard for being fair and objective, but that's why I want to. That's why I want to go over to the average of the last 5 polls. So that's including the one that we've just read, and it's an interesting picture. A very interesting picture. And I'll quickly go through it for you now. And National, I want to say, is 6 months ago. We're much higher than this. In October, they were like 36%. Labour were like 28, 29. And, everyone else was kind of similar. New Zealand First is a little bit higher. Te Pāti Māori is about the same. But this is, generally speaking, a pretty fair lay of the land, though I think they've probably got New Zealand First and ACT kind of a little. It's hard to say whether it's understated or whether it's certainly maybe it's had overstated or about right for ACT. But I feel like New Zealand First, there's no way they've lost support since the election, though the trajectory right now is a slight bit further upwards. Socialite very quickly says, you would need to drag me over bloody shards of smashed glass before getting me to vote for Hipkins. Labour is the party of liars. Never again. Yeah, I 100% agree. I would absolutely nothing would have me voting for Hipkins, Labour, anytime soon. Not with what they currently stand for. But yeah, it does show though that National is a huge problem for the coalition. Where ACT in New Zealand First, there's marginal change, right? There's marginal change to what they had in the election. This is all very, very marginal error stuff. You could conceive that there's a chance that ACT is on like 11%, New Zealand First is on like, I don't know, 7, 8, 9%. It's not out of the question. But, National has dropped 5.5 points. 5.5. And they're only really trending downwards. They're not going anywhere time soon. They're not going anywhere good, I should say. And this is the problem, is that it does seem New Zealanders have a short memory. And this is the problem when people aren't political nerds or focusing on politics on a regular, is they just tend to go with whatever the general societal feeling is, whatever the narrative in the media being portrayed is. Though what I did find interesting about that whole taxpayers union Curia poll recently was that National, of all people, went up. Doesn't make much sense to me. But this is how it would look in Parliament if we had that election result right now. Now, the coalition would hang on by a bloody thread, but it's not pretty. You're talking about National down 6 seats compared to the election. ACT, I believe they're on 11 or 12 right now. NZ First down 1. So, yeah, it really is not flash. And in fact, the only reason the government's okay right now is because Te Pāti Māori have that overhang. If it wasn't for that, it would be a hung parliament. So it's extremely close stuff in the polling right now. And despite the fact that polling does get a lot of shtick, I do feel it's still reasonably accurate. You're hard pressed to find an election where the pollsters aren't within the margin of error. And when it's close, margin of error stuff can be quite dramatic. It can be the difference between a 1 or 2 point gap. Let's say margin of error stuff, they get national underrepresented by 3, ACT underrepresented by 2, New Zealand First underrepresented by 1. Still margin of error stuff, but that's 7-point difference. So, margin of error stuff, it still can have quite an impact. But generally speaking, our polling is pretty good in this country. And so I just want to put that out there and say I have a lot of respect for polling, even if I don't necessarily have a lot of respect for some of the people reporting on the polling. But yeah, I do feel like at the very least, Talbot Mills, get a thumbs up from me. Courier, get a thumbs up from me. Variant on occasion's okay, but generally speaking, they follow a formula that gets you an indication of public mood. But I do feel like, to some degree, there are, especially in the middle of governments, of terms, you can get away with a little bit of fiddling, particularly with the representation, with the sample, to push a narrative. But sometimes, hey, you just get a bad sample. Quickly looking at the preferred Prime Minister stakes, it's getting close, isn't it? Between Hipkins and Luxon, which just shows how bad Luxon is. Yeah, Phil says aggregate polls have been very accurate over the last 15 years or so. Exactly, and that's why I use aggregation. That's why I aggregate the polling, because it does give you a pretty good sense of, pretty good lay of the land. And that's why it's interesting. Winston Peters, for a while there, was actually at the bottom, but in the last month or so, he's kind of shot back up, showing that I think he is doing a reasonably good job as our foreign minister. And that New Zealand First is slowly getting a little bit more airtime, not necessarily all good. But I think people who are fed up with Luxon are like, okay, you know what, Winston Peters ain't half bad, comparatively in terms of his backbone and his ability to just stand up and speak his mind. Chloe Swarbrick, of course, the darling of the Marxists. David Seymour, having a bit of a rough period, to be fair. For a while there, he was polling 7-8%. It's coming down. But here's the trend over time. I mean, National, what are you doing? What are you doing? See, at least all of these minor parties, they kind of just straight line stuff, very marginal changes. But I mean, National, for goodness sake. For goodness sake. I'm so disappointed. Not really. I didn't expect much, which is why I didn't vote for you. And then the government, opposition on aggregate, are officially the more popular. But at least they don't have the seats because of that overhang. So that's fortunate. But yeah, that is not what you want to see. Not what you want to see. And I mean, I make this point because if you can see down here, and you'll see it just above the kind of McRae point on my name there, 8/10/24. Look at that gap. Look at that gap kind of between early October and the start of the year, and how it just disappeared. Disappeared. That's what happens when you're useless. That is what happens when you're useless. But anyhow, that is enough on polling. If you do want to get updates from this, by the way, do go over to my Patreon. You'll get a notification every time I do that, every single time I upload a video. Notably, I did one on Richard Prebble last week, along with Shane Jones. I have a range of things here, including my collections. I did polling updates in the presidential election, of course, which you can see I did it quite often. I successfully predicted the outcome of that election. But yeah, I've got everything. I've got my videos there, my polling there, and of course I can add other things there over time. So do feel free to go over there. Just give it a quick follow, all free. And yeah, you'll get updated every single time I update the videos or the polling. So very, very good. Moving on to the next article, we have Rodney Hyde going back to Bassett, Brash, and Hyde. And this is topical, right? I wanted to make sure this was after discussion of polling because Chris Luxon is done. Who's with me on that? Chris Luxon is done. I mean, he's no John Key. People have a lot of criticism of John Key. They don't necessarily like John Key or think John Key was the greatest thing that's ever happened, but compared to our recent Prime Minister, I suppose he's been the best of the 21st century. But, I mean, still, Luxon has shown that John Key, comparatively, is phenomenal. At the very least, if John Key was leading this government, it wouldn't be so bloody half-assed. it wouldn't be so I refuse to answer the question. Or, for example, what was it? Mike Hosking asked Christopher Luxon whether he would have sacked Andrew Bailey had he not resigned, and Luxon just simply couldn't answer the bloody question. At least we probably would have got a straight answer out of John Key for that. But I digress. Chris Luxon is done. He staggers on, but he no longer has the command or respect a Prime Minister needs. He's proved middle management at best. His policies are just cinders. His social media posts appear like skits. His media interviews are train wrecks. The man in the pub has no clue what he stands for. His team cringes at his attempts to connect. Chris Hipkins can't believe his luck. 2 unforced errors that an average politician would sail through have scuppered him. The first was Mike Hosking asking him if he would have sacked Andrew Bailey if he had not resigned. It was a softball question Mr. Luxon could not answer. Mike Hosking lobbed the question gentler and gentler, every which way, like the Good Samaritan repeatedly throwing a lifebuoy to a drowning man. Luxon thrashed in the water, resolutely refusing to save his own life. It was hard to watch, but impossible to turn away. Just answer, any answer, but no. It was about his expectations, and the former minister knew what they were. And that was that. It made no sense. The Hosking question brought into sharp focus that Chris Luxon stands for nothing. He has no resolve, he has no bottom line, he is a ditherer and a follower. He is not a leader, and even in his dithering, he is cack-handed and inept. The second incident is more troubling. A caring preschool teacher emailed the Prime Minister concerned. What is going on in the education system is not okay. Why are you allowing this wokeness and confusion into schools? I've been a child care reliever for the last 5 years and have had several kids below the ages of 5, even as young as 3.5, approach me in centres saying they are not male or female and that they are identifying as they, them, he, she. These are vulnerable young children who know no better and are only saying it because of what they have seen and heard from TV or older people around them. What is your plan to change this? I, for one, know that whatever they say, I will fight against it as a caring woman of God. Now, I want to quickly say thank you to that woman. Thank you. Someone who's actually taking the time to email the Prime Minister because they're concerned, because quite frankly, the Prime Minister, despite suggesting that, yeah, they would kind of work with NZ First somewhat to try and remove this shit from the education system or help children in this space, isn't really doing anything, is he? The reply from his staff is gobsmacking. This is probably the problem, right? Do we even know if Chris Luxon even read this? Who knows? If he did, I'm sure he just delegated, said, you can write the reply, just say, thank you for your email. Okay, whatever. But what did the email actually say? Thank you for your email to the Prime Minister, Right Honourable Christopher Luxon. Christopher is a proud supporter of the LGBTQI plus community and wants New Zealand to be a country that celebrates and supports diversity, including our rainbow community. Ngā mihi nui. Wow. Yeah, I think that really covered her issues. That directly addressed the concerns she raised. Gave her no pause for concern at all. Let's just get our head around what just happened. So a woman sends an email to the Prime Minister saying, I've got these concerns, that children as young as 3.5 are calling themselves they, them, don't understand that they're, what male and female is, and they believe this gender ideology nonsense that young. What are you going to do about it? And the response is, I'm the Prime Minister. I don't care. I support our woke bullshit. Deal with it. Have a good day. That's effectively what that was. That was a, thanks for your email, I don't care, go away. That's ridiculous. If you're the Prime Minister of a centre-right government, sackable offence. Frankly, that's a sackable offence. Because not only do you not even address the point and then finish with that, you simply just went with that. That was it. Nothing else. I mean, that is ludicrous. That is insanity. If you had any remaining respect for Christopher Luxon, That's gone. In fact, I would love to hear them ask Christopher Luxon again, now that he is Prime Minister, what a woman is. Because unless he says the right answer, there are many people that need to really start considering their vote. You know, I know people in church who still vote National, who actually are involved with National. And I'm still surprised that they are as involved with National as they are given this stuff. You know, when I first joined that church, for example, I was very much in the same boat. I was supporting National, and I shifted away, not only for religious reasons, but because I myself hold myself to a standard where how can I bring myself to vote for someone when there's an alternative which doesn't so blatantly disrespect what I believe in? And I think this highlights it. That lands with a thumb. Sorry. Your concerns aren't of any concern to the government. We're not even going to outline that we acknowledge your concern, just that the Prime Minister stands with the LGBTQI plus community. Nothing more. Good day. The Prime Minister is told of preschoolers confused about whether they are boys or girls or something else. They are wanting to be called they thems or he she's. His response is not to express alarm or to investigate. His response is to support it. No, not just to support it, but celebrate it. I can see no other way to read his response. It's true, he did not type out the mail. The mail was sent by his correspondence lead advisor. But that is his position. At the time of writing, she still has the job. Mr. Luxon has not retracted her statement. We can't take it as the Prime Minister of New Zealand's position. No. Bit of a typo. Mr. Luxon has not retracted his statement, although maybe her is valid in this situation. But we can take it as the Prime Minister of New Zealand's position. The Prime Minister gasped, or the country gasped, when Prime Minister Chris Hipkins needed to be briefed to answer the question, what is a woman? Prime Minister Chris Luxon had time to formulate his answer, and his answer is clear. He supports and celebrates 3, 4, and 5-year-olds being confused over whether they are boys, girls, or something else on the alphabet plus spectrum. And he is unequivocal. He can't say whether he would have sacked Mr. Bailey, but he's clear he supports and celebrates our preschoolers changing their sexual identity like it's a game of cops and robbers. And so Prime Minister Christopher Luxon is toast. Wow. Wow, 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 wow. Thank you, Rodney Hyde, for that. Wow. I need to look at this chat because I'm sure a lot of you are just as dumbfounded as I am. Ooh. Kiwi Mark, welcome. He says he is out. Luxon is indeed out. He will be out before the next election. If he's not, I don't know. We have to pray that people start waking the hell up and start voting for these two minor party alternatives on the right. ACT has its flaws, New Zealand First has its flaws, but of the options available to us, it needs to happen. It needs to happen. PLJ says, Luxon, stick a popsicle in it, call it dog food. Maybe just a Marmite sandwich and an apple will suffice. I hated Key, says Phil. But sadly, you're right. The best of the bottom of the barrel, I guess, for the 21st century. Yeah. I mean, he's the best since... Key was the best since... what's his face? Okay, who cares? It really doesn't matter. He was the best of a bad bunch. PLJ says, except for a few newer faces, all leaderships are subhuman. Subhuman. That's deep. Probably wouldn't go that far. But they are certainly suboptimal. Certainly not living up to the expectations I have of them. So, yeah. Phil, Fingers Dave says, welcome. My friends, kids 6 and 8, can't read. Yeah. Whilst there are kids that can't read, there are Still kids who don't know what a man and a woman is. Tragic. I think I always knew in some kind of way, didn't I? But not anymore. I always think back to the fact that I was only in school 10 years ago, and this non-binary shit didn't exist. It wasn't a thing. It simply didn't happen. No one referred to themselves as they them. There was no gender ideology nonsense that was ever referenced. You had boys, girls, tomboys, tomgirls, whatever the hell you want to call them. Weird guys. And then you had the occasional person who was indeed openly trans. That was it. That was it. And with respect to actually my school, there was no one there like that. But there was in other areas of my life. But very few and far between. Not the seemingly growing demographic of people. And then within a span of a few years, that's changed dramatically. PLJ says, Luxor needs to keep the UN and Soros money rolling. The finance deals all have good governance clauses dictating the anti-human policies, which seem insane, but are all planned. Could be right there. DJ says, I'm convinced Luxon is the same bed as Ardern. I don't think Luxon is by any means as bad as Ardern, because I feel like Ardern was actually capable of doing the damage she did on purpose. Luxon is just a follower. So whereas Ardern, whilst being in some respects a follower, she was still a leader of her group of crazy people. Luxon is simply doing the bidding of the crazy people, and does not have the ability to think for himself, and actually take a firm stance on something that is not, previously agreed upon by the, liberal wing of the National Party. So yeah. Bill says, I remember when you were still leaning heavily national in 2023, was very happy when you went NZF. Yeah, and that happened because I went to the public meeting in Pukekohe in August 2023, listened to Winston Peters speak, left, and I thought, I definitely didn't leave feeling that way after I listened to Judith Collins speak the year before that. I certainly didn't have or hear Luxon and the various opportunities he had to speak in the build up to that election, making me feel as invested in the future he had outlined. And additionally, I just understood that we needed the social conservatism that NZ First offered, as well as the more nationalist approach to things that New Zealand First offered that National simply weren't going to. I had far too much respect for the people that attended the parliamentary protest in 2022 to not support a political party who was actively seeking to go back and look at our COVID inquiry and expand the terms of reference, and the various things like that. I was, invested in seeing them repeal the Therapeutic Products Bill Act, and they did. So yeah, there are a range of reasons why I changed my tune. I realized, just generally speaking, on a principled level, New Zealand First aligned more with me. So I decided, I've given National the benefit of the doubt for too long. I'm going to start just, pulling away a bit. And I'm more regularly assessing, the performance of political parties and whether or not the one I'm currently more aligned with is living up to the expectations to a satisfactory enough level. And hey, things will change with time. But yeah, it's National. They did absolutely nothing to warrant my vote, so they didn't get it. Shortland Chambers says, I sign all my emails with the pronouns alpha male. That's a bit toxic masculinity for me, Shortland. Can't have that. Can't have that at all. Phil says, Simon is 100% right. Luxon is an Adernite. Oh yes, Cindy Boy Luxon. Cindy Boy Luxon. That is what he is. Dead right, Eeryk. We need to utilise MMP better. You know what? This is the thing. Watching recent elections like the UK election, the German election, I'm looking at, Germany has a very similar process to us, almost identical really, but there are some differences. And I'm trying to sit here and I'm trying to think, do I prefer MMP over first past the post? And I find it very difficult. I find it very, very difficult to figure out which I prefer. For me personally, I very much like the US Electoral College for some ruddy reason. It's got a lot more in common with basically just first past the post as it is, because that's effectively what it is, and you get a proportionate number of delegates. But only with the Electoral College, that's all about the president, right? But I feel like there's merit to that if we were to move to a Republican model. But outside of that, with respect to the US model, is how they elect their senators and their congresswomen, men, and whatever. I think there is more merit to that than you realize. And I think on several levels, we should be electing representatives from, from people in our courts, all the way up, right? Because we simply right now are being done wrong. We are not getting the results necessary because we have people in those roles that aren't beholden to us, the voter. They don't care. Why should the list MP from Mexico give a shit about the average farmer? He's a list MP. He doesn't represent anyone but his party. Now, I understand why there's merits to MMP. It's like, yes, we actually have smaller parties with a greater chance of getting in. But at the same time, MMP also discourages people voting for smaller parties in electoral races. Meaning electorates, and people then uphold the idea that we need MMP because electorates are typically two-horse races. But this is because they know that they can afford to maybe give their party vote to a smaller party and then vote for a major party in the electorate because they know they don't have a chance otherwise. And so that's probably part of the problem. And I will make note of this, and I'll switch to it next because I think it's far more interesting than the American stuff, which we can finish off with. But it's for me, I don't see a future where MMP is going to be a long-term way of advancing our nation's interests, of growing as a nation and having strong representation. I don't view MMP as a system which provides strong representatives for our country to get the best results. It very much aligns with our incrementalist style, which frankly isn't doing us any favors, is it? And so ultimately, I think down the road, we're going to find ourselves wanting a change. And when we move to let's say a republic one day, that'd probably be the time to do it. Moving up. Socialite says, Winston is a nationalist, Luxon is a progressivist, Seymour is a libertarian. New Zealand currently does not have a genuine capitalist conservative libertarian party, which is why I feel like ACT and New Zealand First balance themselves out extremely well. I mean, let's actually think about it, right? So New Zealand First is relatively centrist economically. They've got arguably more in common with National than they do ACT. For example, New Zealand First are all for raising the minimum wage, among other things. But also, their rationale for their economic policy is at least rational, right? It's not for the sake of it. So there is that. But then they've also got the social conservative and national interest in mind. Whereas ACT have the more, capitalist mindset with the more progressive social and cultural ideologies. The two balance each other out quite well if they were in a workable governing partnership. We don't currently have that. We've got National, who have, 49 of the seats or whatever it is, ludicrous, and are simply just doing what they will with this coalition, and frankly, it's making ACT and New Zealand First look like fools, because obviously what the leader does reflects on everyone. Tuponorewi 438 says, you're not even going to read out my comments, bro. Well, there's no real point in reading out comments designed to get a trigger. So there is that. But you do you, bro. You do you. Let's see, any valuable comments to read? They're all very valuable to me, folks, but obviously we do need to move on at some point, but I do appreciate all of the input. Phil says, under FFP, we only had a two-party system, essentially. Can you imagine the current Labour National uni party. Well, that's the thing though. Like we did, but then we kind of didn't at the same time. I mean, New Zealand First showed that it could be done. Notably, New Zealand First at the very least. Sure, Winston Peters started off as an established MP within the National Party, but he was able to get elected and retain that spot. But it's difficult. Yeah, I mean, it's difficult. I don't think we should be moving away from MMP anytime soon, but it probably could use some, amendments to make it a bit better. Socialite says US electoral college system where you might as well just not hold an election. I'm not sure about that rationale, to be honest. I'm not sure about that rationale at all. Really not. PLJ says the US electoral college system is a good system which is being saved by Trump. Our system is also suffering from unequal application of the laws, notably the multi-electorate seats. That's an unequal application of the law. It gives people different rights of representation under our law, under our electoral system, and it simply cannot stand. Simply cannot stand. Shortland Chamber says Swiss system is my favourite, with a third of legislation is by direct democracy. Interesting you say that. The AfD party in Germany, the so-called far-right party who did very well, came second in the recent German elections. They'll be leading the opposition. They had, one of their policies was to implement a form of that in Germany. But of course, the established order don't like that at all. Their AfD's inherently pro-democracy policies were they were called anti-democracy because they aren't consistent with the prevailing narrative. That's the standard, isn't it? So, yep. Socialite says National is currently sitting in the political axis where the Labour Party used to sit. Yeah, I mean, you could probably say National right now, the Labour Party of, I don't know, Clark's ears. I don't bloody know, mate. I was young then. But yeah, you make a good point. National is certainly centre-left right now with slightly more right-wing economic policy to Labour, but it's simply not good enough. And I think ACT has a lot to do with how National was going about economic policy versus a national government right now without ACT. With every terror attack, AfD's popularity grows, 100%. We certainly need NZ First to have some form of surge like the AfD. Of all the parties in Germany, AfD's the one that New Zealand First is most alike. Of all the parties in New Zealand First the party that AfD is most alike. Hey, look, we all have differences, but they're a nationalist party. They understand what needs to happen. People simply need to give them the opportunity. At least East Germany agrees. Tuponorewi says, bring back the Mana Party. Hey, actually, I've got nothing wrong with the Mana Party. Mana Party was infinitely superior to this rubbish that we've got right now. Internet Mana Party. Even though the Internet Mana Party didn't do well, but hey. Socialite says the Electoral College is not bound to represent the popular will. They can vote however they want, regardless of what the people voted for, and the Electoral College are appointed, not elected. The Electoral College being appointed is irrelevant. If you actually knew, the Electoral College is simply made up of the actually technically the Electoral College is elected, but they're not elected for that purpose. But they play that role as well. But with the Electoral College, the reason why you're caught up on the whole it's not the will of the people vibe is because it's not considering why the Electoral College exists. It exists to give states equal representation, not the populace the say of who's president. So in this case, the presidency is determined by the states because a majority of the states, or the equivalent of the Electoral College, which is proportionate, has a say rather than just net people. This is because otherwise you weren't going to get certain states agreeing to be part of the United States because they felt like they would have unequal say into who was going to be the president. And so this was one of those compromises, really effective in my opinion. So it's very, very important. So it's about ensuring that Maine doesn't have more influence over the president than California and vice versa. That's the point. We actually need a reform party like the UK Reform Party. Yeah, to some degree. I mean, Reform Party aren't too many degrees of separation removed from the likes of New Zealand First. At the end of the day, you've got nationalist parties who understand the need to be mindful of immigration, focus our efforts in certain things and on spending and so forth. There are many similarities to be made. Phil says the revisionist narrative driven by the EU West left is as scary as INSOC in 1984. Forgive me, Phil, but I was minus 16 years old. Its time is done, and now they are a tool of separatist ideologues. Indeed, with respect to the Māori electorate seats. Now, I'm going to quickly move on. Although quickly, Fingers Dave does make a good point. Nigel seems to be destroying his own party. Nigel has been making a few faux pas. But hey, I'm sure they will survive. They are going up against the Conservatives, after all, who are not exactly good right now. So, moving over to this article here. We have New Zealand First Constitution includes considering different genders, ethnic groups when ranking candidates. What do you think of this, guys, before we read? Do you think that Winston Peters and New Zealand First are hypocrites, or are the media just doing a beat up to try and detract from the fact that they support hiring people not based on merit, but based on the colour of their skin, you know, who they like to sleep with, among other things? So yeah, so there's Winston Peters has deflected questions about whether NZ First candidate ranking policy counts as diversity, equity and inclusion. The Constitution of New Zealand First includes a section calling for its list ranking committee to consider the need for different genders, social groups, ages and ethnic groups to be represented. When asked on Wednesday evening, Party Leader Peters denied that the requirement reflected the DEI, diversity, equity and inclusion, that his party has been railing against. DEI commonly refers to policies or frameworks to ensure the inclusion of individuals and communities with varying characteristics or from different demographics. Now, I want to highlight that one more time. Ensure. What we read about the list ranking process New Zealand First uses has nothing to do with ensuring anything. NZ First 2024 Constitution, which has adopted at the party's annual general meeting last year, outlines how the party should rank potential list candidates ahead of an election. This is the complete discretion of the committee and by a procedure that is collectively decides. In ranking the candidates, the list ranking committee shall consider the ability, expertise, and experience of candidates generally, and of the qualities that a candidate may contribute to the House of Representatives, the need for different genders, social groups, ages, and ethnic groups to be represented. On Wednesday, Peters denied that was DEI. Now, I see Fingers Dave says it is DEI. I fundamentally disagree. And the reason why it's not DEI is because that is not the requirement. That is not the expectation. They're simply ranking candidates based on a multitude of reasons, primarily their ability, expertise, and experience, more generally, but also considering diversity with respect to gender, social groups, ages, and ethnic groups, and so forth, in situations where there are people who are equally capable to do the job, equally qualified. Because that's where this comes down to. Like, let's say you're a party of 10 people. You have got let's say you've got 5 slots filled. They're all very capable. They're all white men. You've got 5 left. There are 15 people available, all very capable. 5 of them are white men. 5 of them are diverse in ethnicity. 5 of them are women. Are you better served as a party putting in 5 men and having a party of 10 men, white men, or having equally competent people who are bringing a point of difference? Because as far as I'm concerned, I would like a party who is able to bring a point of difference so long as it's not at the at a consequence of lower quality. That's the point here. This is the issue with DEI. Diversity itself isn't an issue. It's diversity for the sake of diversity at the expense of quality. That's the problem. And it's a stark contrast to what Peters himself has been railing against. I would like to go back to this part here. Ensure the inclusion. None of this ensures the inclusion. It simply outlines that it is considered. Is it given much consideration? Is it the driving force behind why they will give someone a job? No. Ultimately, when you're looking at a caucus that you're wanting to create, are you better off with diversity of opinion, thought, experience? If you can do that to the same quality, I would argue in a party of 10 men, you have less quality there than a party of 10 men with a little bit, or 5 men with some diversity. The reason being is so long as they're all equally capable, they're bringing a point of difference which has its own intrinsic quality and value to add. Again, diversity itself isn't an issue. Diversity, equity, inclusion as an entire movement or an entire thing that has been implemented by left-wing governments and ideologues is an issue because of why it exists. It exists for the sole purpose of putting people in positions that they should not be in simply because they meet certain criteria unrelated to their actual ability. This is not about putting people into positions irrespective of their ability. This is about considering people after considering ability. If you get my point, I've made my point. PLJ says, this is where the activist police, judiciary, and the ultra-woke bureaucrats are defeating any political blobs forming without their approval. Fingers Day says, who would you prefer flying your plane or operating on you, the best or most diverse? Well, 100%. I think it should be the best, but that's not the question here. The question is whether or not New Zealand First policy on, how they select list candidates is prioritizing diversity over quality. That's not, there is nothing that's read there that states that they are prioritizing diversity over quality. In fact, it's very much the opposite, which is why ability, expertise, and experience of candidates generally is coming first. Dr. Phil says the electorate doesn't see the capable meritocracy of the candidates, but they see the identities. That is a shame, yes. Fingers Dave says better decisions are made by men, far less emotionally charged. Look, I mean, you may believe that I'm not necessarily in agreement there in all cases. I think there are many things that men are just far more equipped to deal with objectively. There are other things where, like, for example, Karen Shaw, I think that for the role that she's currently playing in our current government, she's a really good person for it based on her experience. Now, could a male with the similar experience as her do the same or better job? Potentially. But is there a male with the same or similar experience to her that's actually available to do that? I would say no. So Karen Shaw is a case in point example of why having that diversity of experience, even if maybe she's not as good in other areas of Parliament, of why she provides value that is otherwise not available. And it has absolutely nothing to do with her ethnicity or her sex, but rather her experiences, which happen to align a lot with people who are, of course, also of her ethnicity and sex, which enables her to have difference and a point of difference that others wouldn't otherwise have. But of course, she isn't there because of that, right? She brings quality irrespective of her sex and her ethnicity. Fingers Dave says you're framing it wrong. I'm not sure what I'm framing wrong, to be honest, but hey, I've said my point. Magenta Gloria says DEI means didn't earn it. Didn't earn it. I love that. That's exactly what it is. It's didn't earn it. But this is why I wanted to go over to what Winston Peters himself has said. He says, Stuff has unsurprisingly published an opinion piece today by Jehan Casanada, who decided to give his insights on NZ First stance that the public service needs to hire people based on merit, not on woke DEI ideology. Putting aside him spouting a number of lies, Casanada decided to conveniently neglect to mention that all we are wanting is to remove the blatant provisions in legislation that mandate that DEI is promoted ahead of merit. Why would he disagree with that? He then, for some strange reasons, decided to compare MMP and my career with diversity, and that somehow I was the beneficiary of DEI in our democracy. Newsflash, NZ First began under First Past the Post. The irony is that democratic elections are the ultimate form of meritocracy. New Zealanders don't care what race, colour or religion you are, nor if you identify as a multicoloured VW Beetle. They care whether you can get the job done. If he is so confident that people agree with him that DEI is good and merit is bad, perhaps he should stand for election and find out that the vast majority of New Zealanders disagree with him. Let's see how DEI works for him then. P.S. Just because he may have been a DEI hire at Stuff doesn't mean his opinion matters. Don't you just love that? Don't you love that? That's the kind of sass I want. And it's probably a valid point as well. I mean, if a person at Stuff is incapable of writing an objective article, then why bother? I don't care if it's an opinion piece. You don't write opinion pieces with lies in them. But yeah, I also noted that the left is really doubling down on this whole, Winston Peters wouldn't be here without diversity nonsense, such as this. This is a little bit funny when you remember MMP was introduced to increase representation in Parliament, so Winston wouldn't be here without diversity measures, and Luxon wouldn't be here if the PM was a merit-based appointment. Well, technically, diversity in Parliament would less to do with that kind of diversity, but just more difference of opinion, difference of thought, a variety of different parties, things like that. And so I had something to say of that. You may have seen it. I said, yes, Winston Peters, the renowned MMP diversity hire, who first entered Parliament as the electorate MP for Hunua 18 years before MMP was introduced. The same Winston Peters who also won in Tauranga 4 times before MMP, including as the leader of his brand new New Zealand First Party. In fact, he spent less time as an electorate MP under MMP than he did under First Past the Post, winning Northland once in 2015 after losing his Tauranga seat in 2005. MMP is a great if you want fresh off the boat lunatics in the Green Party, not so much if you desire common sense policy and respect for our lawmaking processes. So yeah, that's what I had to say on the matter. Now, moving back to the chat, the lazy Centrelink bludger, welcome, says, are you staying in New Zealand long term? Yeah, that's the plan. I don't plan on going anywhere anytime soon. I'm on holiday away somewhere, but I don't plan on moving. Fingers Day says, DEI hiring directly caused Toronto airport crash? Probably. I haven't really looked enough into it, but would not be surprising at all. Magenta Gloria says, brains over bums. Brains over bums. I tend to agree, which is why there are no brains to be found in the Green Party, no brains to be found in Party Māori, and very few, if any, to be found in the Labour Party, and a dwindling number in National. A very, very much dwindling number. They decided to get rid of one of their best MPs in Simon O'Connor, at least with respect to being a point of difference, who was able to stand on principle and speak his mind. But oh well. Oh well. Gone is. Pivot time. The Daily Wire brings us, thanks to Daniel Chayton. Hearing erupts after trans-identifying Democrat again gets called Mr. Now, start saying, Representative Sarah McBride, a Democrat from Delaware, that's Biden's hood, the first openly trans-identifying member of Congress, was once again called Mr., a move that elicited an irate response from a fellow Democrat. It happened Tuesday during a hearing of the House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Europe when Chairman Keith Self, what a name, from Texas, called on McBride to speak. I now recognize the representative from Delaware, Mr. McBride Self said. McBride responded, "Thank you, Madam Chair." Oh, that's quippy. Before McBride could get much further, Ranking Member Bill Keating cut in and said, "Mr. Chairman, could you repeat your introduction again, please?" Keating cited an exchange last month in which Representative Mary Miller, who was presiding over the House chamber at the time, recognized the gentleman from Delaware as Mr. McBride to deliver remarks. "We've set the standard on the floor of the House, and I'm simply Self said. Keating interjected and asked, "What is that standard, Mr. Chairman? Would you repeat what you just said when you introduced a duly elected representative from the United States of America, please?" In reply, Self said, "I will. The representative from Delaware, Mr. McBride." This is interesting. I won't bother reading all of it, but it's hilarious, right? Because what we've got right here is a situation where the president of the United States has declared that there are two sexes, male and female. This bloke, who is a representative for Delaware, wants to be called Ms. or Mrs. What probably Ms. McBride. But of course, in accordance with what Donald Trump said, they're not a woman. So Mr. is the appropriate title. And so as such, Mr. Self here is calling Mr. McBride, Mr. McBride. I just think it's great. I think this is the sort of stuff that may seem petty and pointless to many on the left, but it's actually very important. It's important that we uphold truth. It's important that we say, hey, look, you are indeed a mister. So I will call you a mister. If you don't like being called a mister, go find another job, because as of right now, I'm doing what my president stated. My president declared that there are two genders, two sexes. Happens to be an objective fact too. So I'm going to call you in accordance with that. Sound good? I personally think that we need to make that change here in New Zealand. I think that the self-ID bill, scrap that shit. I've got no interest in it. You can change your name, sure. But you can't change your sex. Because that causes far more issues than it actually solves. In fact, it solves no issue except gives you some degree of satisfaction that you're able to stick it to the man and call yourself something you're not. Now, I know two individuals who have actually utilised the self-ID bill. Nice people. Bit quirky, but nice people. Do I think that the ability for them to change their sex on their birth certificate has any difference on how I view them? No. Makes no difference. So then why would it be necessary? The answer is it's not. And in fact, it just causes issues. I'm sure the hospital will find it extremely concerning to hear of a female that is 22 years old who's calling themselves a male, and all of a sudden they're treating that female like a male with respect to the care, and all of a sudden, oh, okay, we might have made a mistake here, and vice versa. Dave says, I watched this PSML, a dose of reality. Very good. Yeah, of course. You watched that, yeah. I'm sure it was very, very good. The Green Party is largely filled with diversity eyes, even their leader. Well, yeah, I notice how it's like, oh yeah, we need diversity in the leadership. We need a man and a woman. Until we don't, we just need a woman and a diverse individual. As long as there's a woman, it's okay. The man's not necessary. So now it's Marama Davidson and a gay girl. That's how we're doing it. Because Chloe Swarbrick doesn't like the blokes, that counts. I mean, come on. No one cares if you like blokes, Chloe, or don't like blokes, Chloe. That should not justify you as being in that role. Now, would I prefer you in that role over Marama Davidson? Sure. But would I prefer no Green MPs to have a role at all? Most certainly. Of course, I can't help the voters. The voters do what they do, but that doesn't mean I agree with the voters. Thank you very much. Magenta Gloria says two-tier governance requires two-tier brains. There are several people in this country, a lot wrong with the brain. That is for sure. Thing as Dave says, as I said earlier, lying has led to 900 men winning women's medals in sport. That's 100%. We need to make sure we're not doing that anymore either. It's a bit disappointing to see how Chris Bishop's handled the whole election promise with respect to making sure that public funding at the very least ends to sports bodies that aren't enforcing that only men and women play in their respective categories, and also that he's kind of prevented or I don't know, he's not really gone the full way with respect to ensuring that men and women in spaces and sports, in public leagues and so forth, are not regulated and enforced as such. That's just Nationals' liberal wing being difficult, and unfortunately it's reflecting badly on New Zealand First, because there's only so much New Zealand First can do. New Zealand First isn't the Minister of Sport, right? And even if they were, again, there's only so much they can do. But certainly, Christopher Bishop is dragging the chain on this issue. He needs to do more. He's not. And that's really very much an indictment on this government. Matthew Morgan says, say that again. Diversity for the sake of diversity at the expense of quality, encapsulated perfectly. Yeah. Is Marama not also a lesbian? I don't think so, actually. I don't think so. Though, you never know. Probably swings both ways. Not my cup of tea, personally. Couldn't stand swinging both ways. I'd get dizzy. But yeah, not my cup of tea. But you get the point of that. Not particularly happy about being called a Mr. I'm trying to think, is this the Mr.? I'm pretty sure this is the Mr. Mr. McBride in the image right there. Over to charliekirk.com. But very quickly, Fingers Dave says, I won an argument at weekend by pointing out chess is split by sexes. Why, if we're equal? Because we all play different roles. The same way that a man has to... Well, actually, I do find it interesting in different sexes, but the queen's all over the place defending the shit. Like, the queen, you lose that queen, you're buggered, mate. But then again, a man's life is miserable without his queen, and so he just wants to end it all. So it kind of makes sense, I suppose. That aside, Trump admin pauses University of Maine system funding over violation of trans athletes policy. And this is what I mean. Chris Bishop has been pathetic on this issue. Needs to start taking a bit more of a Trumpian stance on the matter. The US Department of Agriculture has temporarily halted funding to the University of Maine system UMS, according to university officials. The move follows Maine's refusal to comply with President Donald Trump's executive order banning biological male athletes from competing in women's sports. The USDA is reviewing potential Title IX and Title VI violations related to the issue. Trump had previously warned that states allowing transgender athletes to compete with girls would face consequences, a stance he reiterated during his March for address to Congress. An address, by the way, which I watched in full, along with many of you who tuned in. And it was a very good address. Very, very good address. And he actually discussed this for quite an extended period of time, even not bringing up, but putting on screen and raising awareness to a young woman who was up against one of these trans athlete men who hit a volleyball so hard at her that it smacked her backwards, and she hit her head so hard that she was partially paralyzed with brain injuries. Now, she looked very, very good. Her recovery is obviously going really well, but that ended her athletic career, just like that, because she was dealt a blow that was just completely unexpected and not the norm in women's volleyball. And so, bang, that changed her life forever. An email forwarded to the University of Maine that appears to have originated from the USDA's office of the Chief Financial Officer directs the department's awarding agencies and staff officers to temporarily no longer issue any payments or authorize any other releases of funding to Columbia University or the University of Maine system. The message goes on to state this pause is temporary in nature while USDA evaluates if it should take any follow-on actions related to prospective Title IX or Title VI or Title IX violations. Please take the necessary actions to effectuate this direction from leadership. This pause will remain in effect until further notice. Isn't it interesting how simple simply making expectations clearer and refusing funding is? I mean, it's not the hardest thing in the world, and it can very much get results. That's why so many other places, not this particular example, are obliging. Simply because you will lose your funding. You need to follow the law of the land. You need to follow the executive order. You need to actually start putting your students first, the safety of your students first, notably the women first. Otherwise, there are consequences, and this is how we should operate. Now, I appreciate in our form of government, our system, we don't have the same executive powers that a president has, but we do have influence. We do have the ministers able to say, these are my expectations to you. You meet these expectations. Ultimately, I'm in charge of the budget. You do not meet this expectation. We will be considering how we allocate this budget. We have the power to do that. Christopher Bishop has the power to do more. Christopher Bishop has the power to, last year, decide that there will be no funding going to our sports organisations who do not abide by this. This is why New Zealand First made it their policy. Because they have the power. But Chris Bishop is dragging the chain, as I said. It's absolutely ridiculous that something as simple as obeying the laws of nature is so politically divisive or controversial. Ludicrous. Absolutely ludicrous. Now, we've been going for just about 2 hours now, folks. I'm gonna leave it there. I'm gonna keep the stream going. If there's anything you want to say, you want me to address, want me to discuss, we can quickly talk about that. But for the time being, we're just gonna sit, chill, have a chat for the next 5 minutes or so. Then we'll wrap it up. Unfortunately, as I said, no Simon today, which means I had to do a lot of talking, a lot of waffling, had to deal with me. Not ideal. If I'm honest, I'm going to need a big drink after this. I emptied pretty much this entire bottle. But yeah, I thought we had a very good night tonight, guys. I covered as much as I could. Hopefully it didn't get too boring in places. Had to drag it out, but I'm very, very happy. And thank you all for tuning in, especially without Simon here. I know he's a popular guy, isn't he? He's a very popular guy, far too humble for his own good. PLJ says Bishop has a bicycle. He's a low power unit, 100%. Of course, Fingers Dave, thank you very much for tuning in. Have a great night. I appreciated all your contributions this evening. It gave us something to discuss furthermore. So, yeah, have a very good night, as well as to everyone else who is leaving the chat now, leaving the stream. Have a very lovely evening. Hope to see you back here again next week. I hope Simon will be back as well. But we shall see. Not too boring, just a little bit. That's great. Socialite, thank you very much for tuning in as well. And for your contributions. I love the contributions. It helps keep things going. I like to bounce off people. That's how I roll. So that is great. That is great. Now, if you were wondering, because I did tease it a few weeks ago, the Eeryk McRae show is back very, very soon. I should actually, in the next week, have a test run for you. It'll be pre-recorded, but it'll be a test run nonetheless. Say it ain't so, Eeryk. Say it ain't so. It ain't so. It ain't so at all. It ain't so. So, Socialite says, how to get a reform party established? Well, I think it's simply, you're better off just looking to encourage an already established political party to move towards something like that. We have a party that has a lot in common already, who is off the ground, who is in Parliament. So that would be my recommendation. Go to public meetings when they're available. Hit them up on social media. Do what you can. Send emails to New Zealand First members, to candidates. Join the party. Become a candidate yourself in your electorate. Try and make change from within. There are many, many ways you can do this. I mean, we were discussing one article before where it says, the actual party itself, membership, voted on changes. That's how they actually do things. And if you want policy to reflect that, get involved. I mean, that's one way to achieve that. So yeah, that'd be my recommendation. Socialite says, if you were boring, I'm sure we would have moved on. That's a valid point. Thank you very much for that. That makes me feel very, 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 very good. That's nice. Lovely. But yeah, again, it's so difficult to get a political party off the ground from nothing and to actually have it as a viable option, especially right now when things are so important that we turn around quickly. You're simply not going to get a political party off the ground in 18 months, less than 18 months, and be someone that can contest for double-digit seats in Parliament. You're simply not. Not without some ridiculous level of investment, the campaign of all campaigns. And so, yeah, and I like to remind people, some people think parties like New Zealand First are very old school now. They've got, where's the future? What, Shane Jones? Where is it after that? There is a young flock coming in. I think right now, looking on my screen, Keegan Langeveld. He was a candidate at the last election, I believe, in Dunedin or somewhere in the South Island. Great, he's the leader of New Zealand First, or the Young New Zealand First. Haven't had the privilege of meeting him yet, but I'm sure I'll get around to it at some point. Yeah, he's younger. He's got his head screwed on. A lot of things in common with myself, ideologically speaking. I would say he's got a lot in common with a lot of the people watching this, such as probably a good chunk of you. A lot of things in common, very common sense approach to things. He's the sort of guy that you want to see going into our parliament in the next few election cycles, if not next year. As well as Lee Donoghue. Lee Donoghue, who is based in the US primarily, but he came over for the last election, stood in Wellington, Hut South. He was in the same place as Ginny Anderson and Chris Bishop, so I believe that's it. Stood against them. Hey, he was never had much of a chance there, but he was the one that was at the Young Voters debate and absolutely wiped the floor with those ludicrous positions from the likes of Chloe Swarbrick and even Eeryk of Stanford, who looked dumbfounded that a guy would come in here and say that we should protect women. So yeah, if he comes back next year to stand again, great. He's someone. He's got the sort of the rationale. He's very anti-globalist as well. He's got the sort of attitude and approach to thing that we need. So there is a future here. And unfortunately, that's something that you don't really see in Young Act or younger memberships, younger people in Act and national. I mean, young national members are buddy with Labour. I would say my experiences with the Young Act members, they're a little bit self-entitled and self-righteous. Many have flipped their switch and gone switched allegiances and gone full-blown socialist. It's a bit of a mixed bag there. I'm sure there'll be the odd one that's a bit more of a David Seymour, but they're very neoliberal, kind of don't really have an issue with globalism type vibe. So the point of difference, an established party that you actually have the ability to influence, is already here. I would recommend going out and doing that. But of course, that's not Simon. This is the Eeryk and Simon show, but that's not Simon saying that. That's me. That's Eeryk. That's all me. So yeah. Look, we got to do something at the next election, people. Voting for National and Labour is not going to cut it. Hell, I would sooner you vote for the Greens than vote for Labour. Simply to stick it to the man. But yeah. Anyways, folks, that is going to wrap us all up. We have been going for 2 hours. This has been the Eeryk and Simon show. It was a privilege to host it on my own this evening. I'm sure Simon will be back soon enough. He'll update you, I'm sure. Thank you all very, very much for tuning in once again. And yeah, thank you all very much. Have a great evening. Have a great weekend. I'll see you back here again next week, if not sooner. Thank you very much.